You're listening to the Team Check-In, powered by Teamflect. All right, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Team Check-In. I'm your host Emre, and with me today we have Bonnie Dilber. Now, I usually have a long history in this show of butchering last names, but this one I'm feeling pretty comfortable with. Bonnie, hi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. I know you're like the first person I've ever had say my last name correctly.
Yep, I'm happy to hear that. And before we get to all the hard-hitting questions about HR and everything, you have a pretty huge platform on LinkedIn, right? You have a pretty huge platform on LinkedIn. So what's the story there? How did it get there?
It was kind of organic. Working in recruiting, I think most people in recruiting are on LinkedIn, are using it as a recruiting tool. And so I had been doing that for years. And when I started at my current company, Zapier, in 2021, I was moving from nonprofits into tech and needed to build like a new network. And so I just started posting more on LinkedIn, and then you start getting people responding or sharing or saying, oh, wow, your company sounds great, I want to work there. And just started getting that like positive feedback. And so started posting, and then I was seeing more followers show up.
Oh, that's crazy. So it all happened
very organic.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Usually, like, I see people with like agents and everything, and like people go through like social media agencies just to reach like 100K, but you're killing it on LinkedIn. And
thank you.
So the big secret is just posting organic, whatever comes up.
I think it's being authentic too. I think it's posting, and it's also responding to people. And I think a lot of people focus on what they're getting. And so, they just want to put out the posts and they want to collect the likes and the followers and the sales. I think what people really appreciate is if you're actually engaging with them, you're responding to their comments, you're commenting on their posts, and you're just actually part of building a community. So that's kind of how I try to, adjusting. That's kind of how I try to approach social media.
Yeah, I totally get it. It's all about keeping that like real organic conversation going.
Yeah.
And I love that. Now, my job is, luckily, I'm not fully in HR, but I'm a guy who gets to talk a lot about HR. And but you have a huge background in recruiting and everything. And the big question is, why does HR get such a bad rep? Why do people hate HR so much? What's behind this? And what percentage is true?
And, it's funny because I would probably have put myself in that camp of people who were always annoyed by HR. I, started my career, I think, kind of in the people space, always HR adjacent. So I was a teacher, and then I worked in kind of talent development of teachers, sorry.
I think we froze a little. So before just
I got an error about my location, so I'll start again. Why do people hate HR?
It's perfectly fine. So I'll just ask the question. We had some technical difficulties, but the question is, why do people hate HR so much? Why does HR get such a bad rep?
Yeah, and I think I used to be one of those that was always annoyed by HR because it always felt like they were putting processes in place and making things harder for me as hiring manager in particular. When I was recruiting for my own team, it was HR saying, hey, slow down. You can't just hire that person that you really like and used to work with. You need to consider some other candidates too. Or you need to have a real process, like those sorts of things. And I would get annoyed as a hiring manager because I just wanted to be able to, make decisions. And now in hindsight, I realize that a lot of those things were in place to help us be more equitable, to help us ensure that we weren't just, hiring our friends and building teams who were just like us. Like all those sorts of things that I now realize are so critical for building good teams used to be things that annoyed me. And I think HR is often the folks that say, hey, slow down. Let's make sure that what you're doing is fair for everyone.
Up to code.
Or minimizes our legal risk, like those sorts of things. And you're just trying to go. A lot of times those things don't matter. And so I think that is part of it. And then, I also think people don't really understand what HR does.
Yeah.
And I think there is also an issue that a lot of HR teams are quite outdated and they do operate in very bureaucratic ways. And so and are overly processy and are not responsive to what they're hearing from the people they work with. My current company, our HR is so responsive and engaged, and I don't think anyone would ever make comments like these. But it's funny because I definitely see like how it happens.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I guess that's true, right? We do hate it when people put limitations on us, and we hate processes that tell us to, hey, slow down. There is a method to this. I know I personally do, but there's often like some like right idea behind it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you were totally right about some HR teams being very outdated and old-fashioned. I mean, I remember, and before we had the technical difficulty, you said you were a teacher before.
Yeah. So I started my career as a teacher. I did a program called Teach for America, and it was supposed to kind of be 2 years where you teach in sort of like under-resourced communities. But I ended up staying in the classroom for quite a few years. And then I actually worked for Teach for America. So I helped with their development of teachers and then kind of moved into recruiting from there.
I had the similar thing where I studied literature, and when like literature majors give up on their dreams, they become teachers. So so I did that.
A theology major who also didn't know what to do, so I can relate to that.
Yeah, so I did that for a while as well. And like I think my worst experience with an HR team happened when I was a teacher, because I don't have short hair. I have and my hair used to be even longer. And in a job interview, the head of HR for the school that's supposed to be really modern said, "Hey, like it's all good. We want to work with you, but can you get a haircut?" And I did not understand why, because like, what does that have to do with my ability to teach English? And remember, this is me coming from a place where I really need the job, right? So I can't afford any slip-ups. And the guy hits me with, I kid you not, he says, "Well, because you see, we need like the male teachers in our school to be role models for the kids."
Yeah, and you're like, based on their aesthetic?
Yeah, based on their aesthetic. So they said like, all right, get a haircut. You can have a mustache, but not the beard. So like, I look like J.K. Simmons for some. They had like a crazy code for people, and the worst part was I had to take it, and I had to just swallow that, and that sucked for me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people end up in that position where just even if it's not explicitly stated, I think there are often those like implicit messages that employers send of what is professional, what you're supposed to look like, and I think a lot of people find themselves trying to fit in those boxes.
Do you think like these dress codes and like appearance like structures, are they outdated now in the modern workplace?
Yeah, I absolutely think they are, and they should be. I have tattoos, and some of them are not visible, some of them are, and I actually used to put makeup on the ones on my feet if I was, that sort of thing. So like people, when I would go into schools, because it was against the dress code, those sorts of things, and I think all of that is really, I think it's silly. I think it's, and I think it actually sends the wrong message to kids as well of like make assumptions about people based on their appearance, is what we're literally teaching people when we say that you need to look a certain way to conform and to be a professional. It's not about how you act, it's about how you look. And that is, I think, the exact opposite message of what we should be sending. And so I think one of the things companies can and should be doing is evolving dress codes, is evolving, looking at their expectations and saying, does this actually get us the kind of talent that we want? Is it really about how someone looks, or is that affecting their ability to do the work? And if not, then take it out.
Yeah, to be honest, that whole outdated notion has on multiple occasions stopped me from getting a neck tattoo, and now I'm kind of grateful for it, because like None of the options I had in mind at the time would have been tasteful.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally on the same page with you as well. Now, as a recruiter, right? As a recruiter, we talked about my worst job interview experience. What is one thing you hate to see in job interviews?
What a good question. I mean, I wouldn't say hate necessarily, but I think probably the thing that can be most frustrating is if someone comes in just sort of arrogant or
Mm-hmm.
um uh dropping comments like, oh, I could do this job in my sleep. I've been things that kind of send the message that they feel like they're so well qualified, or they're almost like putting down. Like I
Mm-hmm.
had one person say, uh I could have been that hiring manager. Like I could have hired that hiring manager 20 years ago. Like, of course I could do this job. I could do their job better than them. Those sorts of comments. And no one wants someone on their team. It's not about, I think there's this like common
Mm-hmm.
mentality of the hiring manager doesn't want to hire someone who could take their job. I don't think it's that, but I think it's that if you're signaling that you are too good for the job that you're applying for,
Mm-hmm.
or you're above everyone else, it makes it hard to envision like wanting to work with you and you having the humility to do the work that is asked and that sort of thing. And so I think when people bring in like a level of arrogance, I
Yeah.
think they might think they're projecting confidence, but
Uh-huh.
instead I think it can kind of come across making people question if you're actually willing to do the job that you're interviewing for.
And I mean, okay, there's nothing wrong with confidence, right? Confidence
Yeah.
is good and projecting that is good. But like you said, like arrogance, that there is a line. And Bonnie,
Yeah.
this is the internet. There is no middle ground here, right? So
Yeah.
it has to be like we have to talk about either things you hate or either things you can't live without. Like that has to be it. That's the conversation these days. And yeah, I totally feel that. And now there's a stigma about like the younger workforce being too entitled. And I think, yeah, and I think people are abusing that term just because people are more conscious of what they
Yeah,
want and what they need now. They're suddenly more entitled, right? Just because they have like reasonable asks from organizations.
exactly.
Suddenly, like people are more entitled these days.
Yeah, I am. It's funny because I'm like an elder millennial, so kind of, an early millennial. And they used to say that about us in the workforce too, that, oh,
Yeah.
these millennials don't want to work. And now it's like the millennials saying it about Gen Z. And so I think part of this is just like what happens just for every generation. You think the new generation is entitled.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of what Gen Z is asking for in terms of like, we just want to be able to have work-life balance. We
Hmm.
want to be able to walk the dog. We want to be paid a living wage, so we don't have to
How
have two
dare they?
to these are basic like expectations. And I think we often also ignore how things have changed. That 50 years ago, you could have a family with a single income, just
Hmm.
that didn't need to have a fancy job. And on that single income, you could pay to send your kids to college. You could own a home. Today, you can't do that. Today, a lot of two family,
Yeah.
six-figure earners are not able to afford homes, like at
Oh
least
yeah.
in the US, but I think a lot of the world. And so we kind of, I think, ignore also that the challenges are much greater today in terms, and so when people say I want a living wage, that is because they're not being paid a living wage in 2024. And that wasn't an issue you were dealing with in 1970. And so
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
we, ignore some of that too, like how the
Yeah.
context has changed.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And the thing is, uh, I think everything people are accusing like Gen Z of being entitled for, like because they're complaining about this, they're complaining about that. Well, you were complaining about the exact same things too when you were
Exactly.
going through them. But now
Right.
that you've like sucked it up, you've like paid your dues and now you're past
Yeah.
them, you suddenly don't want other people to complain about those. Like you
Yeah.
hated your boss, you hated your
Yeah.
job too. You hated like waking up early and you complained about it to all your friends. But now, when suddenly someone younger than you does it,
Yeah.
can't believe
Yeah.
those kids.
With student loans, it's, well, if I had to pay them back, then you should have to pay them back too. And it's like, well, you know, why would
Exactly. I
if
went through
someone
it, so
have
you need
easy
to go through
path,
that too.
why not let them?
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, it's so brutal out there for like job seekers and everyone
Yeah.
these days, right? It's incredible. And we're going to get to the AI side of the discussion soon enough. But now that we covered the negative, again, let's switch the dial all the way up to the overly positive side because, again, there's no middle ground, right? No
Yeah.
neutrality whatsoever, right? Nothing can be in the middle. So, what is one thing you see in a job interview that makes it like an instant, yes, you're in, like you're hired?
Yeah. Well, no one, we shouldn't make decisions that way. I have to say, as a good HR professional, you shouldn't make
Uh-huh.
decisions based off one single thing. But I do think something that makes you really excited about a candidate is when they've like done their research, they know the company they're interviewing
Oh, yeah.
with. They're expressing excitement about the product or they're talking about using the product, those sorts of things. I think those are things that get hiring managers really excited because you ultimately want someone on your team. Like your team or your company is your baby. And when you bring someone onto it, you want them to care about it as much as you do. And so the more someone can signal, like, I really care about this, I want this
Hmm.
job, I want to be on your team, I want to make your company better. The more people are sending those signals, I think the more excited hiring teams get about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, hiring teams do sometimes want that little pat on the back, right? I
Totally.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think a job interview where I messed things up big time was I was interviewing for like a hyper casual gaming company, not going to name any names, great company with a bunch of great games. And like I make it through like two interviews, one case, final interview, and they tell me like Emre, you need to do something very spectacular to mess this up, right? And I go, well, the night is still young. Just midway through the interview, they ask me, well, which of our games have you played? And
Oh
I
no.
pause. Like, ooh, I played one where there was like a car. That was
Yeah.
like I tanked that one for me, and like
Yeah.
again, that was all on me. That was all on me. So again, seeing some research done on the company,
Yeah.
huge deal.
Yeah.
Totally get that. And another huge conversation that is going on right now in the world of recruiting, in the world of talent management, is diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
And apparently, the second you buy a bird website for like an overpriced amount of money, you get to talk about it all you want and say all the negative things about it. But uh, it's personally crazy to me that
Yeah.
people can be so negative against the term diversity, right? I just want to
Yeah.
like have these people sit down in front of a mirror and just repeat those sentences. Look in the mirror, look into your own eyes and say, I'm against diversity in the
Yeah.
workplace. Just say it out loud and see how it feels, really. So, what do you think about the recent backlash against DEI?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the most misguided perspectives and takes I've seen. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. I have never seen a company hire a less qualified person for
Hmm.
diversity reasons. It is always, we want a more diverse candidate, always hiring the most qualified person on the market. And so I think people are often looking for excuses of why they're not getting, a job or why they're not getting
Hmm.
promoted.
Uh, uh,
And
I need to stop you because we froze again, so I'm just gonna ask
oh, sorry.
ask the
Okay.
question again. Quick technical break. Now, one more time. So, what do you think about the recent backlash against DEI?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's incredibly like misguided. So, I have never, not once in my career, almost 20 years, have I seen a company hire a less qualified person for diversity reasons. What I see is companies saying, let's look at a diverse slate of candidates that are all really qualified. And
Hmm.
then often when you do that, the person, a person perhaps that is, brings diversity to the company ends up on top because of their qualifications and the skills that they bring. But I've never seen companies say, hey, let's hire less qualified people. I think a lot of the data points being used, I think, like, for example, the owner of said bird site A lot of the things he pointed at, Boeing's challenges, saying that that diversity was the issue, and yet they added diversity as a metric they cared about 2 years ago. All of the things that have been going wrong with Boeing started 10 plus years ago. So, make it make sense. These issues had nothing to do with diversity. And so, and I think people really like having a competitive advantage when it benefits them. They like nepotism. They like it when you can get a job because of your parents getting you in, or because of your financial status. Or, because your parents give you a couple $100,000 to start your business. They love that kind of, advantage. But if any company says, hey, we value diversity, suddenly it turns into that's not okay. And,
And it's always these hypotheticals, right? The discussion is always surrounded with these hypotheticals where, just a diverse doctor is going to be hired instead of a doctor who is more qualified, and they're going to leave someone dead in the operating table. Just never in a million years would they imagine, the same qualifications are also out there with diversity in a diverse workforce as well.
Yeah, it's kind of assumed that if it's not a white man, they must just not, have been less qualified. There's this assumption that white men are the most qualified, everyone else is less qualified. If you chose to hire them, then
they're a diversity hire.
Sacrifice their qualifications, and that's just not true.
Yeah, exactly. So people are not prioritizing diversity over merit. That's not it. That's not the case.
I mean, not once have I seen it, and I've been in this space, and I have been in companies that really value diversity, where, 75% of our workforce was, identified as Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. I've been in environments like that and still not once have I seen them say, hey, we're going to hire this person. I know they're not quite as good, but we want to prioritize diversity here. So
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
Again, I can't wrap my head around the whole backlash, and the whole thing is, people love to pretend that it's a leveled playing field out there, right? It's a leveled playing field out there for the white male versus everyone else diverse. Growing up, they all had the same opportunities. It's all leveled. And now they're getting the advantage. Sure, not years and years of segregation, discrimination, all that. Those were non-existent. We live in a post-racism world, post-sexism world. Everything is so nice, so good right now. And now suddenly, these people are getting an unfair advantage.
Yeah.
Unfathomable.
I've had to work for everything I've had.
Sure. And another huge part of the discussion is, and it really freaked me out when I first saw a huge part of my job is I go through tons of blogs. I write tons of blog posts as well, but tons of blogs on HR. And on trends about diversity and performance review biases and interview biases, I kept seeing this little thing that said, AI is going to come along and eliminate all biases in reviews, all biases in job interviews, and all the workplace biases. And I keep seeing the use of AI tools as this big savior of HR and recruitment. So what is your opinion on AI tools being used in recruitment?
Yeah, I think we're a pretty long way away from that, because AI is still just going based off what it's been taught, and most of AI has been built by mostly white men, and it has inherited the biases of the people who have created and trained it. And so if you live in a biased world, then your AI will also be biased. I know of one company that was building their own internal AI platform for recruiting, and they had to scrap it because of how much bias was coming out in it. I think articles, I don't want to name names or anything, but I think you can find articles. This was years ago, before the whole generative AI thing. But I think that over and over again, right now, we're still in a world where AI is incredibly biased. And so I don't think like we would see a change there. I think AI can be really useful in recruiting for things like checking the tone in job descriptions or checking for biased language in job descriptions when you've trained said AI on that. I use an AI note taker in interviews and love that. It captures a lot of really good information. So I think there are certainly uses for AI in hiring processes, but not in decision making. And if any company is trying to use AI to make decisions about what candidates should move forward or who is going to be the best fit for the job, then I think they're actually setting themselves up for failure. Right now in 2024, maybe in 2050 we'll have different technology, but I have yet to see it technology that actually, like,
I mean, right now,
in that way.
Yeah, right now I feel like it's at that, the Wright brothers airplane stage of it, right? We're currently there. I mean, it's currently in its like worst. It's currently right now the worst it will ever be, and then. I mean, it's certainly magnificent. Everything that can be done with it, it's incredible. Like no two ways around it. But again, seeing it as a tool that will eliminate our biases instead of just eliminating them ourselves. It just feels wrong to me. And I mean, you talked about some of the benefits of it, like some of the ways in which it can be used in recruitment. And on a previous episode of the show, we had Matt Warzel, who's like I call him the Stephen King of resumes, because that's how prolific he is with like resume writing and rewriting. And he went on this long tirade of, right now we have robots writing resumes and then robots scanning them. So yeah, it's right now currently like these two bots talking to each other. And like one bot trying to fool the other one into scoring a human an interview.
And I honestly haven't seen, I hear about these bots that are supposedly scanning resumes and, prioritizing them. I haven't seen that technology personally. And I've used 10 or more of the, top like resumes, the closest I've seen, which we've had for the last 15 plus years. That I've been using applicant tracking systems is keyword matching, which has always existed. So it's not a new AI thing. So I also think a lot of people are kind of overstating this idea that like bots are scanning resumes and deciding who gets interviews. That's not happening. But I do think that it's a great marketing tool for a lot of these companies and resume writers to say, I can get you a resume that's going to beat the bots. And when people think that there's a bot they have to beat, they feel like they can't do that on their own. That must be new. And so then they go and give someone their money. To me, anyone who is trying to make a sale by claiming that bots are, you have to like beat the bots, I wouldn't give them my money.
Oh, okay. That's some shade. Okay. Okay. I'm not going to argue with that. But so as a recruiter right now, I mean, if anyone has like recently applied for a job in LinkedIn, right? They see the position on and they see that little number right next to it. And it's so discouraging, right? That number is like 1,600 people have applied. It's a war zone out there, right? That's a meat grinder.
Yeah.
So how does someone stand out among that like 1,000 plus people?
A couple of things I would say. One is that number may or may not be accurate. It could represent often. LinkedIn has no way of actually knowing how many applicants a role has because it's not connected to LinkedIn Easy Apply. So that number might just represent how many people are showing interest in the role. Now, there could still be a large applicant pool, but I know I have roles up there that will say they have, thousands of applicants, but on our side, we're seeing like a few hundred. It's still a lot, but it's not as many. So that's like one thing I would say is don't trust that number. The second thing I would say is generally a lot of people apply for jobs they aren't qualified for, and they are more likely to do that when it's on LinkedIn Easy Apply, where they just click a button and it goes. So just because there's a lot of applicants in that applicant pool doesn't mean there are a lot of qualified applicants in that applicant pool. There are probably a lot of applicants that a recruiter is just clicking no on. And so even out of 1,000 applicants, a recruiter might only find 50 that even begin to like meet the qualifications of the role. Yeah. So if you are qualified for a role, then go for it, is what I would say. And don't let that number deter you. I would also say if a company has an applicant process that is not tied to like easy apply, they have some additional questions, things like that. Those often, most people will skip those questions and just hope that their resume is good enough. I have a role I'm actually recruiting for right now, and out of probably 150 applicants, over half of them skipped those questions. They just wrote NA or C resume. And so those are just automatic rejections, even if the resumes were great. So, because I'm not going to consider a candidate who didn't take the time to actually like demonstrate their skills over the ones that did. And so, you know, I would say like, consider things like that. It might be a little more work, but you're probably competing against a much smaller pool in those cases.
Yeah, I like to pretend that this show is very global and like every single soul on earth is listening right now. You just broke a lot of hearts with that. You said 150 applicants, took 75 hearts were broken because I'm sure they were all listening to the team check-in.
Exactly. They were listening and found out, crap, that's like why I got rejected. So,
but it will definitely help them in their next application, which is good. And so I like to think that the recruitment process doesn't end with, you know, okay, you sign the contract, but then there's the onboarding stage, right?
Yeah.
And what is your formula for like the perfect employee onboarding program?
Yeah. So I think one is actually giving the employee time for onboarding. No one should show up on day one and just be expected to perform. I have a friend who said 3 days in, she was told she was meeting expectations in a new job and delivering results. I was like, you've been there 3 days. Like, do you even know how to log into your email? And so I think companies have unrealistic expectations, and giving people time to actually get to know the company, get their technology set up, meet some people, talk to their manager, understand what their goals and expectations are is important. At Zapier, the first 2 weeks is really considered pure onboarding for everyone. And you spend a lot of time with other new hires, getting to know the culture of the company and that sort of thing, and not expected to actually do your day-to-day work. And I really like that. I also think strong onboarding should set clear benchmarks so people know 30, 60, 90 days in, where should I be? When should I be fully ramped up in my role? When am I first expected, if you're a new recruiter, when am I first expected to start working on roles? Communicating that to people early so they understand what to expect in their first few months, and have that alignment. And then I also think strong onboarding should teach people a lot of the implicit things about the company, make those things as explicit as possible, especially if you have a global workforce. So teach people, what do you use email for? What do you use Teams for? Where does different kinds of communication go? What is the tone that you're expected to use? How do people communicate with each other? Is it okay to say, BRB if you're running somewhere to someone, or do we not talk that way? Even things like acronyms that are commonly used, have a list of those. One of the things at Zapier that I've never seen before when I started was there was a sorry.
Yeah, you broke up a little again. So what was the thing that surprised you when you started at Zapier?
Yeah, there was a document that had various inside jokes and how they had developed, so that new hires wouldn't be caught off guard if certain things were happening.
That's really sweet.
And so it's like, here's a couple of stories that the old timers know that if you're new now, you know them too. And so things like that were really helpful. And I had never seen an employer do that. And it just kind of made me feel, even from my first week, that I kind of could fit in better, keep up. And I wasn't wait, what does this mean? And so I thought that was really cool.
yeah, like what happens when Halloween rolls around, right? Do I just show up in a costume and like be the only one? Like, is
Yeah,
that going to
like
be a thing? That's scary.
yeah. And so yeah, so I think a lot of those things, the more that you can make some of the implicit norms and things explicit for people, the easier it is for them to sort of feel like they fit in, they know how things work. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think the most important part of it is to make the onboarding process natural and just fully integrated into the
Yeah.
daily workflow, right? So if you're, let's say if you're using Outlook on a day-to-day basis or Microsoft Teams on a day-to-day basis, then like the tools you use for onboarding, it should be integrated into
Yeah.
that. And if you're using Microsoft Teams or Outlook on a day-to-day basis, then the best onboarding program solution for you would be Teamflect with automated onboarding tasks, easy to set up mentor-mentee relationships, 30, 60, and 90-day review templates, surveys, and so much more. Teamflect is the perfect performance management, employee engagement, and you guessed it, employee onboarding software for you. And if you want to try Teamflect for absolutely free, you can always click the link in the description. Yes, I've been looking for an opportunity to sneak that in. That's
I was like, that was like rehearsed, like
oh, you get used to it over time.
for commercial.
Over time. And the thing is, like, if someone that just goes back and just listens to all old episodes and this video and watches the video, there are like moments when I get like a spark in my eye where I realize, ooh, now is the time for the plug.
It's the time.
This is where I can plug something in real good. So Bonnie, we're like slowly approaching the end, and like thank you so much for coming over. Are there any things happening with you, any new publications, anything you're putting out that you want to let people know about?
Yeah, good question. So I have, yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. So feel free to follow me on any or all of those. I also do have a newsletter, and you can find the link through any of my social media, but I don't sell anything. So it is not, a lot of newsletters are actually intended just as like sales funnels. Mine is not. I try to just like give additional advice, but that's how, if you have questions you want me to answer, if you want to set up, I do like free networking chats. I have one a day, and I only give those out for newsletter subscribers, that sort of thing. So if I can be helpful in job search, career development space, you can check out those platforms.
And what are you doing on TikTok? Like,
what do I do on TikTok?
What does the TikTok
videos
look
about
like?
Career stuff. So
is it like a bunch of trends and weird dances?
No, I don't do trends and weird dances. I just do. I talk about similar stuff to LinkedIn, but I talk about it on video. I also like to talk about, kind of corporate greed and topics like that I just enjoy, but it's very similar to the LinkedIn content, but on video. Yeah. And then I have an account that nobody knows about that I recently started just for like fun, that I can do trends and stuff on.
You heard it here first, folks.
I know. Nobody knows the name of it. None of my friends follow it, but I recently just put a little video on it of a cat in my neighborhood, and that has over 300,000 views, and it's my highest performing video in like the last month, probably. So anyway, maybe I'll start doing cat content.
I mean, who would have known that cats would do well on the internet? No.
I know. So
I'm like this close. If I wasn't allergic to cats, I would be like this close to becoming like an old cat lady. Just
yeah. I mean, I'm a dog person, but this cat is pretty cool. So.
Okay, so if you're listening to this, then I think with the speed at which that video is growing, whether people are following it or not, they'll probably come across it at some point. At some point. Bonnie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
This was a great conversation. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find podcasts, leave us a like, subscribe to the show. It really helps us out. And if you want to try the best performance management software for Microsoft Teams, you can always click the link in the description. I'm Emre, and Bonnie has been our lovely guest. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for having me.